vaccinated. A lot of vaccinated people.
Being an entertainer now.
We're good.
We're good? All right, call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. December 12th, 2023, 4:42 PM. Alder Galvin, Alder Burnett, Alder Johnson are all present. Alder Hutchinson is excused. Approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Galvin, second by Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item D, approval of minutes of the November 28th meeting.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Galvin, second by Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item E, regular business. Number 1, consideration with possible action to accept the U.S. DOJ 2023 Justice Assistance Grant for $59,630 for portable handheld radios for Green Bay Police Department and ballistic vests for Brown County Sheriff's Department. Any questions?
Motion approved. Second.
A motion by Galvin, second by Burnett. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 2, consideration with possible action to accept U.S. DOJ 2023 COPS hiring program for $250,000 in federal funds with a $451,242 match in operating funds to offset the costs of 2 additional sworn officer positions over a 3-year period.
Just one quick question. And I read through this and maybe I missed it, but we're just covering the salaries of 2 officers, or are we actually increasing the number of officers we have by 2?
This would be an increase to the number of sworn staff by 2. And so the match would need to go in the budget for the out years.
After 3 years, right?
It would probably be after year 1. The plan would be to establish these positions effective the 1st of January 2025.
Okay.
And so this would be 2026 and on.
Okay. And will those be, have you picked a spot where you want them?
Yes, our plan is to put those 2 positions in the neighborhood response team. That unit currently has 2 officers in it. And a unit like that really should have more than that. And the plan all along was to try to get to the point where we could staff that with 4 people. So this would get us there.
All right. Thank you.
Chief, a couple questions. So I was reading the project narrative, and in here it said that we've not been able to fill positions due to budget restraints, costs, tax levy, ERP. We've always been told we can't fill the positions because we don't have qualified candidates, but we've always authorized the positions. So can you just, because this is it's obviously a great grant, but it comes with a financial commitment.
Right.
So what I'm trying to understand is, do we not have the people, or is this a financing issue? And do we need these 2 positions in our chart of, in our org chart, because we're creating 2 brand new positions and committing to that for the next 3 years, right? I assume we can't reduce if we don't need the positions.
Right.
So I just kind of want to understand that.
Sure. As far as the grant application, this is a grant application that we've submitted every year going back probably at least 10 years. And so what I think probably happened there was that grant application just got recycled from previous years. I can only speak to the last 2 years since I've been here. When I go back and I look historically, yes, there have been some financial obstacles to staffing all of our positions. That has not been the case in the last 2 years. Our difficulty has been just finding qualified candidates. And that's a risk with this grant, because we will take on the obligation, we will have to assign someone to the roles funded by this grant and carry vacancies elsewhere. I think that for us, that risk is less than it is for a lot of police agencies. Right now, we have 7 sworn vacancies, which is pretty good in this day and age where it's as hard to recruit as it is. But that is certainly a risk that we have to keep our eyes open to, that we won't be able to fill all of our positions, and this gives us 2 more positions. We have 2 staffing problems in the Green Bay Police Department right now. One is the one that we're talking about, that it's been historically difficult to fill our vacancies, although better at it than we were a couple of years ago. The other is that the size of our police department relative to demand for service is not in alignment. And, we did some work in last year, and our estimates just in patrol are, we probably need another 9 officers and 1 sergeant's position just to keep up with demand for service and patrol. And we also have needs in places like the neighborhood response team, carrying 2 vacancies on a long-term basis in community policing, 2 vacancies in detectives, so that we could try and at least have people in patrol for emergency response. So this helps us, yes, there is always the risk that we will have difficulty recruiting for sworn police positions. But this also helps us with the other staffing issue that even at full strength, your police department really is not big enough to meet the demands for service that this community has.
So what kind of restrictions will this grant have, if council in future budget cycles ever wants to reduce positions or maybe reassign positions? Is there any flexibility to do that, or does this grant now restrict us?
The grant is for 3 years, and that's the grant and the match. And so as I understand it, after that 3 years, then we have that flexibility.
Okay, so really this is obligating us, and I just want to make sure everyone understands, right?
Yeah.
This is obligating us to not only maintain status quo, but increase a commitment for the next 3 years.
It's offset somewhat by the grant, but yes.
Somewhat, I mean, a third,
Yeah.
right? Roughly, so, okay.
Yeah,
Renee?
I mean, you may have answered this question, or maybe it was in the narrative, I just didn't read it, but how would we pay for the $450,000 over 3 years? Is that money coming out of the ARPA overhire dollars or levy?
It would be up to council to find the funds for that. That would be the commitment that the city would be making if we accept this grant, is that we're committing to coming up with that money from somewhere, most likely out of the general fund.
Yeah, and when would the hiring, assuming we get the grant?
So our plan, and we've been approved for the grant, we just need to
Right.
accept it, but our plan would be to actually establish these positions and fill them in the beginning of 2025. So we would have all of 2024 to
Okay,
figure that out.
makes sense.
One other question, Chief. Looking at the salary that you're anticipating this person to be making, it's going to be someone with some seniority,
Right.
or 2 people with seniority, which means they come out of the shifts. Now, we're already 7 down, and I imagine not all of those are out of the shifts, but this could affect the shifts, could it not?
It could. What it would mean is, what we've been doing to minimize the impact on patrol is carrying vacancies in special ed assignments. So we have 7 vacancies right now. A little over half of those right now we're actually carrying in detectives and in community policing. And then we're carrying another 2 vacancies in supervision, sergeants. And actually, we have another vacant commander position right now. We do anticipate filling those because obviously sergeants are not things that we can leave vacant for very long. One of the reasons why we've had to carry those vacancies in places other than patrol, though, is the really high demand that our patrol function has on it right now. And so what this would really mean is if there are vacancies down the road, it may have a bigger impact on other specialty units because we wouldn't be able to touch these 2 positions. We also want to minimize the impact on patrol because that's our highest priority. That's, emergency call response is the highest priority we have. But we're already doing that juggling act, and it's better now than it was when we had something like 17 vacancies.
And I guess my concern is, as an alderman, I have more contact with community police than I do with detectives per se, or sergeants or that. But I'm seeing an impact from the lack of community police officers like we used to have. And I'm finding that it's taking longer to get a response or to get them able to find a time to respond to some of the issues that I have. And I know with detectives, I mean, a lot of this avoids having to pay overtime and, because we don't have any safety staffing with that. But do you anticipate at some point in time, barring retirements, that we're gonna have 100%?
That's the goal.
I mean, is this something you see that we're doing better on? I mean, are we recruiting better? Are we retaining? I mean, I know there's always the issue,
Sure.
you spend a ton of time hiring and then someone just can't make it. And then you gotta start all over again.
I think we are doing better at recruiting. Like I said, I mean, for an agency, we have 187 sworn positions right now. That goes up to 188 on January 1st. It has 7 vacancies. It's not a bad vacancy rate, especially if you look at larger cities. There are larger cities with much higher vacancy rates than that. One problem is that the total number of sworn positions kind of assumes that they'll all be full. And really, if you want to be able to have to make fewer of these decisions about where to carry vacancies, then one way to do that is to have enough budgeted positions to cover not only all the positions that you need to get the work done, but some percentage on top of that to account for the fact that at any given time, some percentage of your sworn workforce will be in basic training and won't be fully deployable. And that's one of the reasons why, like, we're close to full sworn strength, but because we were down so many positions that were vacant for so long, we've done a ton of hiring, and we still have, I'd have to look at the numbers, but we still have a number of officers still in that initial training phase where they're with a training officer, where they're in the academy, and they're not fully deployable. So, for an agency this size, generally the rule that I've used before is about 6% of your sworn staffing you can count on to be not fully deployable at any given time due to basic training. So add 6% in positions on top of your 187, and that's what you really need to staff to if you want 187 police officers worth of work all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, that's what something your predecessor, I talked to him quite a bit, because when I was working in my post-retirement job, I was visiting a lot of different departments, and I think it was Menasha had a pretty robust overhire program, where when a guy said, I'm retiring on January 1st, when he walked out the door, a kid just finished his training and actually got into his car and went right to work, and there was never a blip of shortages. And that's what I'm hoping our department could get to that point at some point in time. I'm sure the fire department would like that. Because then you cut down on this amount of overtime that we see occurring from that. But at the same time, I think it's also good for morale for everyone to know that there's not going to be these shortages, so that detectives aren't running short, CPs aren't chasing their tail. We don't have enough supervisors, to take care of everybody at the same time. And, and in amongst that, there's injuries and all these other kind of things that crop up, and the people that just quit because they got a better deal, or, they won the lottery or something like that. So, but I think you're correct in having a percentage that are always like in the system of being trained so that we can fill them in as soon as someone leaves. When I started, we had the luxury of having nearly 20 people on a waiting list that had already been vetted and told they could have a job as soon as there was an opening, and that's all they were waiting for. Well, the cadet program, that's what that was. That was 12 or 14 kids. They had their degrees, were just waiting for someone to retire so they could, get sworn in.
Right. Yeah, if you have 187 police officers worth of work to do, and like I say, there's 2 different facets to our staffing problem here. One is 187 probably by the data we have is not really what
Right.
you need. But then on top of that, you have to account, and it's easy to figure out what that number is for your city. You go back in history and look at any given time, on average, how many officers are in that first year of basic training. Edit out the eccentricities in the data, like the year that you had an unexpectedly high number of retirements, or the year nobody left, and then there you go. Just add that to your. But all of that also comes with a cost, because we are seeing labor costs in the policing world go up.
Exactly. All right, thank you. There's no more questions. I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Galvin, second by Burnett. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 3, consideration with possible action on a request to purchase 2 long-range electric vehicles and 2 wall connectors from Tesla for the police department for the amount of $99,210. Questions? Alderman Burnett.
Yeah, actually, could you just kind of talk your way through this one? Like, why is this particular one needed versus non-EV cars?
Yeah, so our goal here with this is to do a pilot project to see what the feasibility is of using electric vehicles in a patrol setting. So the plan is to assign these vehicles to our traffic unit. That way we don't spend all the money that we would for a marked patrol car. It keeps the cost of outfitting these as police vehicles down, but it also will give us a sense of how well electric vehicles will perform in actual police use versus having them as trip cars or admin cars or something that doesn't get that kind of use. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out in front of, you know, the world we may be living in here within the next 5 to 10 years where all we can get is electric vehicles. And if there's a huge problem with deploying an electric vehicle as an emergency vehicle in our climate, in our city, the way we use our cars, I would rather find that out now with a pilot program than down the road when maybe we don't have as many options. And so the plan, the reason why we decided we wanted to go with this particular brand is because it's actually a lot cheaper. One of them, and we want to look at 2 different models of this Tesla Model 3, probably when it's outfitted as a traffic car, will actually cost less than one of the Ford FIUs that we use as squad cars right now. And we have the money for this already. We have leftover bonded funds for patrol cars from all the way back in 2021. We've had some supply chain issues with Ford over the last few years that look like they might be starting to right themselves, but we're still having, we had our whole 2022 patrol vehicle order from Ford canceled. And so we're trying to, you know, we have cars on the road that are past the end of their life and are costing us more to maintain than it would cost us to replace them at this point. So really, this is just, the idea behind this is it's a pilot project to see if we get to the point where that's all we can get in the next few years, just given the way the auto industry is going, again, to try to figure out what kind of bugs to look out for, what kind of, we don't even know what we don't know as far as problems we might have with these vehicles. And there are police departments in other places that use these as patrol cars, but there's a big difference in climate here from, say, somewhere in California where they don't have to worry about if the car's going to run if it's 30 degrees below zero or some of the things we just.
Are you familiar with any northern climate police forces with this?
I know there are some in Wisconsin actually that have none of them that I know of have rolled out full fleets of them, but a lot of agencies are doing the same thing we're doing where they'll buy 1 or 2 and see how they work.
Do you know what's the life expectancy of the EV car?
Well, it depends on, to get the answer to that question, you have to ask the manufacturer. And so you always get a very optimistic view, I think. And I always want to take what someone who wants to sell us something with a grain of salt, what they tell us. But they're supposed to last at least as long as one of our Ford utility, or it's called an FIU, it's a Ford Explorer. And the warranties cover the cars for up to 100,000 miles. And then the other thing that we're hearing based on the research our team has been able to do, so we can probably expect lower maintenance costs. Right now, there is a risk in collision losses from these vehicles. If you get one in a crash, it tends to cost more and it tends to take longer to get it fixed. But for just regular vehicle maintenance, apparently there's no coolant to change. There's no, obviously, there's no fuel system, no fuel filters to get clogged up. You know, what we hear from some of our employees who have electric vehicles is basically the only maintenance they do is put windshield washer fluid in it and change the wiper blades once in a while. But again, that's the optimistic view. How are these vehicles really going to stand up to police use? And our contingency plan is, if it's a disaster and we discover they don't work at all, number one, we learned something about how quickly we want to go to an all-electric fleet if we can avoid it. And number two, we'll just use them as trip cars or admin cars where they don't get as hard a use, and we'll still get the same use out of them for basically the same cost as the car we'd be buying anyway.
So how soon could you get them?
They get here a lot faster. Apparently you order them online and they're here within a matter of weeks.
So just kind of reasoning through this, the way I kind of view this decision is currently a patrol car that's not EV is like $35,000.
No, it's fully upfitted right now. I think we're running 52, 55
Purchase price is about 42 now and all the add-ons.
in the upfit cost. Yeah, and I think we get up in our capital improvement plan to about $60,000.
But in recent history, I thought it was like 34,000 for.
No, we haven't been requesting enough money to bond for what the cars actually cost. And we've corrected that problem. We
Yeah.
had been just basically recycling last year's numbers for a few years. And that was one of the reasons why we had a chronic car shortage, because we would get bonding funds based on an outdated price for the car, and then we couldn't afford all the cars we actually needed. So we've corrected that problem, but yeah, a fully upfitted marked patrol car right now is between $52,000 and $55,000.
Okay, Bernadette, in the latest CIP that was brought through in
Yeah.
October, they did have 58.5.
But in the past,
It was sitting at
my
about
memory-
33,
okay, so I'm
34,000
not
for year after
losing
year
my
after
mind.
year, and they
Okay.
said it'd be for
Yeah.
15 cars, in the meantime, they put the order in, they could order 9, 10, 11 vehicles, so they were falling behind because they weren't asking for enough per vehicle.
okay, that makes sense then. So for this particular one, because especially with the rebate or the tax credit of $7,500, even though we're not quite sure how the EV technology would work for our department, it actually makes good financial sense to do it. You get them quicker, you meet that need, we can experiment with it, test them, see if it makes sense long-term for us to pursue more. So having said that, it makes sense. Now, if it was a $33,000 car, that's a different conversation, but they're comparable in cost.
And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to go with Teslas, because like yes, you can get a Nissan Leaf for much less than that, but that vehicle is not adequate to send a police officer out to do police work in a, like the traffic unit or patrol. And so comparable vehicles from other manufacturers, like Ford had a product that would have worked for $70,000. And then they had a pickup truck that we looked at that was even more than that. So that, and then there's also an issue with the chargers for them, that Tesla has its own charger plug-in, and apparently the federal standard for those plug-ins is going to go to what Tesla is and not these other manufacturers. So when that happens, in the next few years, we won't need to retrofit chargers or charging equipment.
I think it's a good idea. I mean, to take two and experiment. I mean, I watched our department go through if you're old enough to remember the infamous K cars. And then Ford came out with a wonderful system when gas was real expensive, where they had a system in there that you could turn off the car and sit, and it would continue to pump hot water through it to keep the engine warm, and then our cars wouldn't start because that system failed. More recently, when they went away from Crown Vics, our department bought, I think, 16 extra K cars one year and just put them into storage for 2 years, taking out 8 at a time until they're all gone. But you look at those Dodge Chargers, they sure look sharp, huh? But they were junk, and they were too small. So now you're stuck with the Explorers. And I mean, I think it's good for us to check out 2 of these cars and see how they do work out for us. Is it feasible? And if it isn't, we're better off waiting a few more years. and stick with the old gas burners, but no, I think this is a wise idea to go at it small like this and just see what happens. Who's going to be doing are we going to be doing our own data research, or are we going to be working with anybody else?
We're gonna do it in-house, and we're gonna track just the total cost of ownership over the life of the car, and then any other, issues that come up. There's all kinds of things that we have to look at. How does it hold up to the kind of use that we do in police work? Is there enough room in the trunk for all of the equipment? We think so, because we did look at how well all of the things that we need to put in it would fit. There's all kinds of.
What about room in the front? Is that where the battery is?
The battery's actually underneath it.
Well, that's what I heard, but some cars where they used to have the engines, now that becomes extra storage space. What about, are you going to be able to put cages in there? And
At this point, we're not going to, because we don't want to, and that's one of the other reasons why we're going to start these with a traffic unit, because to put a cage in it, you can. Apparently you can get that stuff, but it's just spending more and more money on the car. And if we figure out that this thing is totally inadequate for police work, then we have a car with a cage in it that we have no use for.
okay.
So at least if, without a cage in it and with just the basic unmarked and with some emergency lighting equipment, like we set our traffic cars up now, if in the worst case it doesn't work for police use right now, we can reassign it to something else.
Okay. Just for future reference, what color are these cars going to be?
I believe we're going to order black ones, but I can't confirm or deny, so you never know who that is behind you.
All righty.
I assume that rebate is from the Inflation Reduction Act?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so we're looking at 98,000 and then minus 15,000, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
really
99.2.
You're about 83,000.
Yeah.
So.
The incentives will be applied for in 2024.
Yeah, okay.
Motion to approve?
I will second that. So we have a motion by Galvin, second by Johnson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 4, consideration of possible action to purchase replacement desktop computers and laptops from Vanguard Computers, Inc. for $33,196.80. Questions?
Nope.
Now, we'll take a motion.
Second?
Motion by Brunetta, second by Galvin. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 5, consideration of possible action on a request to allocate $1,562 of 2023 contingency funds for the United States Department of Agriculture to provide a white-tailed deer survey. So this is going to tell me where the big bucks are, right?
Not necessarily. But what it will tell you is how many deer there are in a general area of the city and where they're located. So last fall, we had a neighborhood meeting in the Preble Park area. Alder Morgan was there, and the residents that were there, I would guess about 20 to 30 residents, and they all were saying the same thing, that consistently they have 10 to 20 deer bedded down in their backyards in a specific area of the city. And so there's a large concern in that neighborhood to kind of thin the herd. And so what this will do is the USDA will fly a drone over that area and do a survey for us to see exactly how many deer there are and where they're located.
Motion to approve.
This reminds me of when Alder LaFave submitted the communication for the wildlife sanctuary area, and she put a nice little statement in there. It's time to cull the herd.
Oh.
For some reason, that always just stuck in my head. So we have a motion by Galvin,
Second.
second by Burnett. Any discussion?
Well,
Yes, sir.
obviously, Director Ditchite, in my area, far west side, I get complaints still to this day. So folks see this, like what's stopping us from like a mad rush of contingency funds to look at surveys in other parts of the city, particularly on the west side?
Yeah, so our plan is to try this in this area first, because by far, although we've gotten complaints in other parts of the city, by far, this seems to be having more deer than what we normally hear complaints on. So we're gonna use this as a trial this year, and then if there's a desire to incorporate it into our annual budget to do larger areas of the city, we can do that in future years. But this is a starting point to see how well it works and see how accurate it is.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Change the amount.
Change the amount?
I had West Side.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I haven't received many complaints, but out in my area, especially in summertime, they seem to be pretty active in the neighborhoods. So,
Yeah, and then there will likely be a future request after we get the survey with some discussion as to whether or not the city would want to hire the USDA to come in and thin the herd and use contingency fund for that. So that's something that other municipalities have done. West Bend does it on an annual basis, and they have X number of dollars built into their budget for that. But right now, this is just the survey, and then we'll come back at a later date to talk about where we go from here.
Downtown seems to be okay for me right
So
now.
far.
I have seen one once,
See?
standing on Dousman by where the old Titletown Brewing was. That was an odd one, running through the street.
when I was a kid, we had some in Tank Park.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay, I think we did get a second on that, right?
Yep.
Yep, so any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 6, consideration with possible action regarding a budget amendment resolution for unbudgeted overtime for special events.
Motion approved.
Second.
Motion by Galvin, second by Johnson. Just a quick question. I mean, I know this is unbudgeted events. Chief, some of the items in here are clearly predictable. Farmers market, yeah, I mean, we know that happens every single year. Is there a reason that we're not budgeting for those?
I can kind of try to speak to that.
Mhm.
A couple of things is, one, we don't know how much it is. And some of these events, yeah, obviously during COVID, we didn't run as many events. So then you have it in the budget and then you didn't run them. In this case, it also helps keep, for expenditure restraint, these are things that they truly are offsetting revenue. So it just keeps your expenses down and then we
Okay.
budget for it, so.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. Item 7, consideration is possible, actually, I'm gonna make a motion to suspend the rules and take up 7 and 8 together.
Okay.
That's a motion.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Johnson, second by Galvin to take 7 and 8 together. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All right, so we're gonna take up the DPW equipment replacement and parks equipment replacement. Director Ellenbecker, you just want to give a little background on this?
Sure. This was just an item that I had reached out to the department heads and asked if they could bring it back to our committee and have it come along with the capital improvement plan. And part of this was driven by, as you know, through the payment plan, we also had some employees that would talk about the equipment, how some of the equipment was old and how it needed to be repaired. And I anticipated that somewhere along the line at bonding time or when we're looking at CIP, you may want to know more about the equipment in probably all of our departments, but the two departments that came up more often during the payment plan and budget process was really our DPW and our Parks Department. So I talked to the mayor and we just decided that this would be a good time to at least bring these items and just bring them in front of you. We do have a full list of fixed assets for all of our departments and these were specifically pulled together by these two departments. But my assumption is you either receive and place on file, or you can redirect staff to do something with this information, but just thought it would be something to bring in front of you for review.
Okay. So Director Ellenbecker and I spoke about this earlier today, and I'm glad that we brought these forward. I think it really helps us visualize the age of our equipment so that we can be better prepared to make decisions about all of our capital needs. Dan, this isn't a knock on you. I like Steve's chart a little better. It's easier to kind of follow and really kind of visually see the age of the equipment. And if I would make a suggestion, it would be kind of adopting kind of that format, if it's not too difficult to adjust, because I do think it's easier for us as alders to see the running list, like what's oldest to newest. If there's, and one of the things that we talked about as well is just a fixed asset list in general. These are obviously vehicles, heavy equipment, but I think seeing all of our assets and really kind of what is the expected age and when should they be replaced. I think there's a healthy conversation probably to be had around, okay, the recommended lifespan of this is 5 years, but can you get 6 years out of it, 7 years? I think there's a healthy discussion that can be had around that from year to year. But right now, I feel like as alders, we're a little bit blind on some of this. We're obviously trusting in our department heads to come forward with what needs replacement. But I think if we want to be fair and equitable to all of our departments and their needs, because there's one thing I can probably say with a great deal of certainty: when police and fire need new vehicles, they're getting them, and that's not. Obviously there are different needs there, and I appreciate that, but when you're looking at DPW, and gosh, there was one item in here, 34 years past replacement, I think. Many that are 15, 16 years past replacement. To me, that's a sign, something that's symptomatic of maybe a greater discussion that needs to be had around how frequently this equipment should be replaced to make sure our staff has the tools they need. Because I would imagine we hit a tipping point at some point where the cost to maintain these things outweighs the cost to buy new. So, I don't know.
Well, I think at the same time too, after listening to the testimony from the workers, is that you have mechanics that are so far behind. And then because of the hiring issues, you're pulling mechanics from doing their job, which puts them even farther behind. But if they had newer equipment to work with, there'd be less breakdowns, they'd be on top of things, and this equipment would all be out there working the way it's supposed to be. So it's kind of like a domino effect. When we start having equipment as old as some of this stuff is, and you realize you can't even get parts for it anymore, you have to start fabricating parts or buy old parts that aren't even that good probably. It's just, again, I can see how it affects morale, I can see how it affects the ability to do your job in a timely manner. It's just, there's just all this that happens, and we've got constituents that want to know, hey, how come this isn't happening? And a lot of it is because we're too far behind. We've got, too many vehicles that aren't working properly or having to be repaired too much, and we have employees that are spending too much time with that kind of stuff. So, you save some money by not replacing a truck this year, but how much does that cost you down the road? Extra. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that we can't, it's hard to, do a study to see how much that's really costing us, where it actually might be better to be spending more money on the front end than spending more money on the back end.
Well, my gut's telling me, and I don't want to presume to speak for any of our department heads, but they're probably put in a position sometimes where it's, all right, am I going to put in for a new loader, one that's working, but maybe is aging, or am I going to repair more streets, which is what everyone's screaming at me about? And it's kind of an unfair position, I think, to put our department heads in, and that's why I'm suggesting if we could see the full fixed asset list.
Exactly.
Right, and I don't know if it makes sense to have a policy where we're allocating, like, hey, 30% is gonna go to equipment, 30% is gonna go to roads, 30% is to this.
And
So I
this is
just-
what we're
We're
stuck
gonna
with.
have that discussion under item number 9.
Okay,
Right,
yeah,
well, and that's part of what we've, it was because of people coming forward and letting us know what's actually happening in the trenches. The boss's jobs are, this is what you've got to work with, and their job is to say, okay, I'm gonna make it work. But what we're not hearing until recently is how this affects the employees, and then from them, how it affects the jobs that they do. And I'm sure Steve or any one of the other directors could sit here and go, yeah, duh. But until you actually see the ages of these vehicles, you see how far past they are. And it's obvious, yeah, the fire department, you'd like your vehicles sooner, and I think so would the police department, but if you compare the police and fire vehicles to the other departments, it's night and day. Their turnover is much faster, their vehicles are much newer because they're police and fire, and, you know, lives depend on it. It doesn't mean lives don't depend on the DPW or, you know, the Parks Department equipment or the forestry, but it's kind of a different optics that people are looking through when they make these decisions. And so I agree with you fully. I think we need to see exactly what we have here. And I mean, I understand in just a few minutes, we're gonna be talking about, we've been trying to hold the limit at how much we're bonding, but at the same time, you see the need to probably be spending more money.
Yeah, I think that's the important piece of the discussion and why I sort of went back to, you know, percentages in terms of how we allocate, right? Because obviously if we just start bonding more, one, there's a state limit
Right.
on how much we can bond, but then two, if you're bonding, that puts more pressure on your levy in the future, right? So either you're raising taxes or you're reducing other spending. And I just feel like right now, we're kind of making decisions with our, you know, with at least one hand tied behind our back by not knowing the full picture of all of our asset needs.
Right. But I think what we heard was, we're no longer doing more with less, we're doing less with less. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think we have to really, really try to find that answer and alleviate some of these problems.
So,
Our fleet manager has gotten rather creative. 2 weeks ago at Improvement Service Committee, we brought an item forward for consideration which got adopted. We had a loader that was retired from service this past year, in 2023, that was sold to a private individual. We requested of that individual to contract that under contracted services back to us for snow fighting over the winter. That's normal for us to do, is go out to contractors and get rental equipment. And because it was a recently retired from service DPW unit, we were comfortable with the unit. We knew what its capabilities were, what condition it was in, something that we wanted to use. How are we going to pay for that? And rather than bump up our contracted services line item, what we actually wound up doing was we had 2 dump trucks, 2 of our fairly new dump trucks, where the frame rails had split. And it wasn't worth our time or effort to do a cab-off restoration of the frames. The units were retired from service and were going for scrap. The same contractor offered to take those 2 frames, which had an aggregate value of $20,000, and take those 2 frames off of our hands in trade for giving us 5 months of rent on the loader. So we traded the loader for 2 pieces of scrap.
So we rent vehicles,
Oh, we have for decades.
no, but I mean, for $20,000 for 5 months?
Oh, yeah, for a loader, that's a good price.
mhm.
That's cheap. You'd hate to see what we pay for graders.
I don't want to know.
No, you don't. But we have literally gotten to the point of bartering with stuff that's sitting on our lot that normally would go for scrap. We're literally to the point of bartering that for services.
Thanks. Well, we're
He's good.
releasing vehicles now, so I mean, you know, we're always trying to find different ways, and I think
Yep.
we've been fairly successful at that, but you save $100,000 this year and it's gone next year. So it's like, again, I'm not sure what the answer is, but
And I'm trying to think of what the appropriate action would even be here. You know, obviously, there's nothing we need to do, I don't think, with this list right now, but if there's any additional direction we want to give staff, what information we want to see.
right.
I mean, we have basically the vehicle list for 2 departments here, right?
Right,
That's
well,
a piece of the picture.
If I could, Steve, real quick, this year, or this upcoming year, you want to spend 16 million. Is that because we have so many vehicles that are out of date or over their estimated time of usefulness? Because it goes, the first year you want 16 million, the next year it's 1.3, then
Oh,
it's-
that would be simply to bring us up to date.
That's what I mean. So we've got so many vehicles that are so out of date, it would just get us caught up.
Correct, that would get us started. We're not necessarily requesting that. What
No,
we're
and
saying is to get us
and
current.
looking
that's
down
what it
further at
costs.
your
Yeah.
requests, obviously you're not. But that's, again, that's another point for us, that we've painted ourselves into a corner that I don't know how we get out of it. And I would like to see us find some way over time to get out of it. I mean, just like taking out loans for squad cars the last 3 years. It's just, it doesn't make sense, you know, so.
So maybe we could refer this to staff for, just, you know, direct staff. I mean, that's $16 million, right? So to direct staff to figure out how we, not in this bonding cycle, but in the next one, start to incorporate this into our 5-year capital improvement plan, while also considering other listed assets, other fixed assets. Or maybe coming up with a plan.
There's got to be
For how we're
something
gonna
we
address
can
this.
do, and maybe this is something too that we present to the state legislatures, you know, that are allocating the money to say, look, we are trying, but we're losing ground. You know, we're losing ground, we're losing money spending, how much money are we spending on our loans that if we could just budget it, we wouldn't have to take out the loans?
Mhm.
You know, and so far this hasn't cost us in that someone's been injured or hurt, or we haven't been able to get somewhere where we need to be to help someone, but I'm sure that's a concern of staff, that this could potentially impact us in that way. But, I mean, this is something where I think the people that allocate the dollars to us, and other communities, we can't be the only community in this kind of a pinch. But I think people need to see this, when people are coming to us, you know, especially I'm gonna start campaigning, and you know what I'm gonna hear? Taxes, roads, and you have to point to things like this to explain to them that, you know, these are the things that are holding us back from being more successful with solving their problems.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the new shared revenue was certainly a welcome contribution, but I think in the grand scope of things, it still falls short in terms of all the needs, and I think we're gonna be looking at another cliff in the not-too-distant future that's probably focused more around debt than your annual budget. But because we're not, to your point, we're not the only municipality that, you know, hasn't been able to, you know, the levy hasn't been able to support operations, and so they've turned to debt. We did that too, years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know, maybe rather than directing staff, you've kind of heard the conversation, so I think maybe we could just receive and place on file, and staff can kind of digest and find ways to incorporate that into our future discussions. Is that okay?
Yes.
Motion to receive and place on file.
Second.
Okay, motion to receive items 7 and 8. Motion to receive and place on file, motion by Brunette, second by Galvin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Item 9, consideration of possible action regarding the 2024 capital needs and borrowing request. Director Lundbecker, do you want to give an overview?
Sure. Back in October, or well, earlier this fall, we brought you the full CIP. We received that and placed on file. That was in October. About a month ago, we brought you a list of really all of our expenses, but at that point, we didn't have really all of our funding sources identified. And so what you have in front of you now is the same list that you've seen probably about a month ago, wherein we found some additional funding sources that we just weren't able to identify at that point. We either got put in the operating budget, again, ARPA, maybe there was a grant, maybe there was fund balance. So what we were able to identify at that point, we have in a third column on the spreadsheet, leaving the middle column as we're looking to borrow for 2024. We have it broken down by general levy requests. If you look toward the end of the report, general levy request now is sitting at about $18.6 million. The other funding sources would be sanitary, storm, and parking utility. I do believe that those numbers could come down a little. We don't actually have their fund balance, a portion built in here, but that is their expense, their need on the front end. So this would be looking at a general levy borrowing of around about 18.6. We have a slight change we might want to make there, but right around $18.6 million, and then sanitary, storm, and parking about $19 million. So that is the request put in front of you.
Okay, so roughly half is levy supported, the other half is other funding sources. And I noticed, of course, there's some TID investments here, but that's going to be from TIDs that already have a balance. The capital improvements that will be made, their ARPA interest was applied to bridge maintenance, so that's not part of the borrowing request, but is something that would happen under this proposal, meaning the bridge maintenance will obviously occur.
Right. Now, after reading through this, I really don't have, it looks pretty, makes sense, it looks pretty solid. I can't see where, we could probably nitpick a few dollars here and there, but I don't,
I would just kind of point out one in particular, City Hall. There's 1.5 million, half would be in '24, the other half '25. You may recall, I've at least publicly stated in the past that I didn't want to authorize any major funding until the Ad Hoc Facilities Committee made some progress, and I think the work that we've done there is sufficiently progressed enough to recognize that whether City Hall stays here or it has a altered use, like that work needs to be done.
Yep.
So I feel comfortable with that. I wanted to share that because in the past I've opposed that, and this is one that if that service went out, which is way overdue for replacement,
Yeah.
there's no easy fix where materials are readily available.
we've been putting that off for a long time, so.
Yeah. Any discussion?
Not really.
Approve.
Motion approved?
Second?
There's a motion by Galvin and a second by Burnett. Any further discussion? Director Grenier.
As you had alluded to under the prior discussion, that's something that I had been talking with Director Ellenbecker about, and that was a suggestion we were going to be bringing forward to the Finance Committee for consideration before the entire Common Council, and that is to have at least a rough percentage. Take a look at what we're going to have for, if we're going to look at our bonding limits and go above the 17.3 or so that Ellers has recommended, whatever that number is, but have the committee or the Common Council, however you want to do that, at least for a guideline or a framework, make some allocations to capital equipment and fleet. And that way, we as department heads have an operating guidance to work within, so we can work with each other at a department head level. If we know that you're going to put, let's say for round numbers, we're going to have $20 million worth of bonding that we're going to have approvable on a going forward basis. And of that $14 million going to capital, or $3 million going to fleet, $3 million going to equipment, whatever those numbers are. If we know that as somewhat of a rough guideline going forward, that gives us the opportunity to meet with each other prior to coming in for a bond request and help us prioritize our needs with each other before coming to you and seeking that money. So I think it would be a good idea, it would be a very strong suggestion from DPW and from me personally, working with you as a council, to have some sort of a guideline like that. And I don't expect you to make that tonight. I would expect you to take that under consideration, and if you decide to enact it, come forward with some recommendations in the future. But I do think, and again, speaking with Director Ellenbecker, I think that would give us a lot more, it would give us a lot more direction at the department head level.
That's a great suggestion, Steve. And I think maybe what I'll do is I'll work on a communication to that effect, that can appear at a committee meeting in the future.
Sure.
I think we've got obviously a year, roughly, to get that in place before the next bonding request. So, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for discussion and collaboration within City Hall to really get the best outcome. Because that's one of those things that always just leads to silos. Nobody intends for silos to exist, but you end up jockeying for your own position, your own department, your own personnel. And I get that, and I think this is a way to maybe break that down a little. Okay. Diana, one thing that we did talk about earlier, city is currently at 37% of its bonding threshold as established by state. This amount still keeps us well within a comfortable range, right? That
Correct. Before we brought this to you, information to you, we did go back out to Ellers and have them revise what they had give us on a presentation not too long ago, and we had them revise it to put 20 million in for general levy borrowing for the next 5 years, knowing, as you've seen our CIP, it's not like we have one high year and then the next couple of years and dollars drop off. They tend to keep growing, actually. And so they did a projection on doing $20 million worth of borrowing over the next 5 years. And per their spreadsheet, based on equalized value continuing to growing and where you have some payoff and you add more, they are showing on their spreadsheet 37% of the limit. Next year to go to 36, 35. It actually continues to drop based on the equalized value projection on how that's going to grow. So again, we're only at about 37% of what the state is allowing. Our internal debt policy says we want to always try to stay below 50%. Again, internal policy, but that is what our policy is, to stay below 50% of the limit. So at this point, no projection at $20 million for the next five years takes us over 37%.
Right, and so, I wanted that point to be broached, because to me, there's good debt and there's bad debt. And I think we've been, in the past, I think we made some bad debt decisions. Galvin, you brought up a great example, 10-year bonds on 3-year squad cars, right? To me, that's a bad debt decision, right? So, but I think these are responsible decisions. This, to me, is good debt with a caveat, and that is interest rates right now are a little higher than they were a couple of years ago. And so, I assume once we pull these bonds, we'll be given out buyout periods that typically happen in whatever they are, 5-10 years, depending on the
You have a refinance, correct.
the term, right? So there'll probably be some opportunity there. Ideally, we would have probably borrowed more a couple of years ago when rates were like 2%,
Yeah.
but.
But even then, we were paying off some bonds early because the rates allowed us to get
Yeah.
out of it early, which
Yeah.
saved us money, so.
Right, but I think right now, the fact that we have adopted a practice of, terms aligning with the life of the asset, I think has made a huge improvement in terms of the way that we look at some of this stuff. So I'm more than comfortable with what we have in front of us too, because I think that practice is really put us in control a little bit more. Okay, if there's no other discussion. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. It's just me, or is finance getting easier and easier? All right, item 10, to approve the contingency resolution approved by Common Council on December 6, 2022, 23, I believe, for $30,000.
Correct, there is a mistake there. 12/6 of 22.
Yep.
Really, this is just a follow-up.
Mhm.
This was approved to move forward with. The final bill is just got paid this past week. That takes us exactly to $30,000, and so we're now following up with the actual resolution to transfer the funds.
Yeah, for clarity, this is something Ad Hoc Facilities Committee's been working on. Flow analysis is helping us make determinations around space needs, so that way we're not ultimately giving a direction to overbuild or underbuild spaces that we need, not only for City Hall, but police in particular. Fire we determined is sort of a thing unto itself, would likely have its own needs. So this, I believe the flow analysis was really, we only ordered this for police and City Hall, right?
And Muni Court.
And Muni Court, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so, just a reminder, if folks weren't connecting the dots on that, what that's about. Okay, any discussion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Burnett, second by Galvin. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. F, informational, 2023 contingency account is at $244, $643 and 36 cents, minus the couple of authorizations we had tonight. Next Finance Committee meeting will be held on January 9th, 2024.
Sounds good.
Is
See
there a
you all
motion
then.
to adjourn?
Motion adjourned?
Second.
Motion by Galvin, second by Burnett. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Thank you, staff, for all the hard work.